Okay. And you mentioned in your response to that question that you wrote a note too. Can you walk us through what that topic was about?
Sure. So before I came to law school, the reason I applied to law school is because I was really interested in working at the intersection of the healthcare system and the legal system. And that's kind of a theme that has come out throughout law school for me, whether it was classes or professors or research. And so my note is another example of that. Both my parents are physicians, and I was just, chatting with them one day, and someone had called my mom, who's a psychiatrist, just saying, my cousin is acting like this, and this. Like, what would you do in this situation? And my mom jokingly went, well, tell them to make an appointment and I'll tell them what I would do. And I kind of was like, Mom, like, that's a little harsh. Like, just give your opinion. And she was like, no, you lawyers come after me. And so obviously it was not a conversation directly about academics or anything, but it made me think, really, would my mom, a physician, be liable for something like that? That if, say, she gave her opinion on offhandedly at a party or to a friend and something goes wrong, could she be sued? And so I started doing research and I started finding that actually these questions have come up before, but every state court is kind of doing something different. And so that's also when I realized, okay, this might be a good topic because it's not a settled question in that sense. There's a lot that can be said. And my taking this on as a no could serve as a resource for maybe a professor who is a stalwart on these topics and say, okay, what are different states doing? How does our court system deal with a question like this? Is there a trend in one direction or the other? Should there be another trend? How do we deal with that? That kind of thing. And so once I kind of had that question of like, I wonder what happens. And I did a little research, I started seeing that there was room for this. Now, you may have a similar thing where you're like, I wonder, and you may Google it or put it into another database and see, actually, there's like a million articles written about this. So that's a sign that, okay, maybe this exact question has been done. Or you may research and find there's literally nothing. Those kinds of two extremes would just be really hard for you to work on something. I was lucky that my question led to an area after fidgeting and kind of morphing my question a little bit over time, talking to an advisor, that I found a path. But it's possible that you may have that moment and then not be able to follow it through just because it's already been done a lot or there's literally nothing. So I just wanted to put that out there as well.
Great, thank you. And then I guess the next question we have are, do you see any common mistakes when reviewing topics, or like if you do see any, what are they?
Sure. So I think one thing that I noticed a lot last year was, like I mentioned, a lot of folks wanting to write about current issues. So think about what was going on at this time last year. There was conversations about vaccines. There was conversation about, religious freedom and mask mandates. There were questions about racial justice going on, and all of those so important, such important dialogues to have. And one thing as editor-in-chief, I was super passionate about was, one, making sure that we have diverse topics and authors, and we were acknowledging issues, social issues throughout our writing. And so it wasn't just boring legal talk in that sense, but also that we were responding to what's going on in the time. That's how we make sure that literature is current and helpful to what's going on. But like I said, the issue that can happen with that is if you pick a really narrow question that really is just too contemporary right now, one, it's very possible that gets answered in the next 2 months. For an example is, say Congress puts out a law and you're like, oh my gosh, like there's so much buzz about this, we don't know what to do. Well, 2 months from now, they may vote on it and it may pass. Well, okay, that got solved. At most, then you can say, okay, a better version would have done this or a worse version would have done that. But that's not going to be like the most exciting endeavor for you, but also for the benefit of literature. So if you're going to pick a contemporary topic, which you shouldn't shy away from, you just want to make sure that the legal question embedded in it is something that can be applied to different situations beyond just the current landscape. Second, one thing is that if someone picks something that's too broad and they don't take the time to narrow it down, they'll just have too much research. There won't be a target audience for it. And so we wouldn't know what to do with it. There's organizations issues with that. There's research issues. There's a issue of what kind of field do we even put this in? Like, is this about housing? Is it about immigration? And so obviously you want your topic to apply to as many people as possible, but you also don't want to go overboard with that. And obviously the other extreme is it being too narrow. And this one is when people, I think they catch it more because they'll just have such trouble researching if you pick something too specific. I think a lot of people can get frustrated in that process, which is so understandable. I did at times as well. But the important thing is then reevaluating, maybe like reconfiguring things a little bit and being able to be malleable to the process. I think that's another thing that I saw a lot of note writers not be able to do successfully necessarily is be malleable to, you started out with one question, maybe the research is pointing you in a different direction. That's okay. That is development. That is literature. That's academia. And so I think being able to go with the flow and being okay with that, like, hey, I picked something that maybe wasn't a good idea, but I still have time. I can reevaluate it. So those I think would say were the biggest hurdles that I would find. The one other thing that I'll say, which I'm not sure is specific to just how we evaluated notes. So this is something to talk to your leadership about in terms of their criteria, but the way that we had folks formatted is we would have a first section, part one, really where the writer would lay out kind of what's the issue, what are the relevant legal terms, legal scholars, legal whatever involved with the topic. The middle section being like, okay, what are different people saying on both sides? Like, show me that there's a like a debate about it. And then the third section kind of being a resolution. Because we're students, our resolution is not going to be the most novel, nor is it going to be the most meaningful part of our research or our product necessarily. But you still need it because that's what's going to make your writing novel, right? There's so many people who've probably thought about, should corporations require mandatory vaccinations? You're not going to be the first one to come up with that question, but it's how you go about doing that and maybe how you suggest a solution or how you suggest people go about finding if that's the right thing to do. The pitfall that we saw though was that folks either in their time management would not give that enough thought. So it would look like they just put a few paragraphs together, therefore not making their piece stand alone and be unique. But also that even if they had thought about it, that it just did not give anything novel. What you want to think about is even if this is 5% different from something else, it has to be different than what's already being written. Again, we didn't, and I doubt that your leadership, is expecting this to be the next big thing in the said field. But the point, what I used to tell our note writers is, you want your piece to be novel enough that some professor who's the expert in that field picks up your piece and then uses that to help their research and their article that they eventually do. That is, in my opinion, the ideal goal, because we're only students, we only know so much. So that's the other pitfall that we kind of saw toward the end of the process.
And then, as you said earlier, that I guess there are sometimes that you see similar topics, but I guess the resolution sort of changes the outcome.
Yeah.
Can you maybe talk a little bit more about that and just sort of give suggestions, I guess, for how writers can ensure that their argument is unique, even if it is a similar topic to other people's?
Of course. So sometimes it'll seem like the broad field or area is very similar, but there's plenty of novel questions that can be asked. So for example, we've always had a lot of folks write about like sentencing law and policy. And there's so much you can write about, right? Like, should there be mandatory sentences? What do you do about probation? How should states go about dealing with judge-made punishment and things like that? And each of those are a novel question, but they're in a niche field within criminal law. So I think the first thing is, don't be taken aback if you hear someone maybe using some of the same articles or maybe using some of the backbone of the basic legal arena that you're dealing with. But if something is too similar, that's when it would feel like so duplicative that what's the point in it being two different pieces? That even in my tenure, I was nervous about two pieces being like that. And we actually early on had the note writers talk because they also knew the topics better than I did, right? Because I was just reading over their proposals. They were deep down in the nitty gritty of the research. And those two note writers spoke with each other and actually realized, okay, we might be citing two of the major same cases, but we're actually talking about slightly different things. And then they explained it, and then they made sure, because they knew the other person was writing about something else, to stay away from that. So that kind of communication is also really great because I think it allows for making sure that those resolutions or those specific debates are unique. So I think if you go back to how I described those 3 parts of a note, you really want to make sure not only part 3 of the resolution, but your part 2 is also pretty unique. We call it the conflict section. You want to make sure that maybe not, even if the exact conflict could be similar, the way that you're talking about the conflict, the viewpoints of the conflict, that needs to be reframed in a different way. And, I think just being able to get ahead of it as soon as possible, I think this is probably where your leadership will come in handy is, you'll probably be giving them drafts or talking to them about ideas and things like that. Keeping them in the loop is super helpful because other people will keep them in the loop and they'll be like, oh, wait, like Caroline and Saniya were actually talking about 2 really similar cases. Let me connect them and see what's going on. So that's a really easy way early on to be able to make sure that it's nothing that's exactly the same, but that rarely happens, I think.
Yeah, and something that we do too, guys, just so you're aware, if there are 2 people who are writing about very similar notes, we'll approach you and see if you're interested in working together. That's something that we've done in the past and it's been very successful. So that is something that we offer if you're interested in that. So you mentioned earlier that there are some notes that are not debatable enough, I suppose, or they're moot at this point and really you can't make an argument about them. So I wonder if there are any notes that are too political or too contentious to make arguments about too.
So I am not one to shy away from the too political or too contentious, but the one thing you want to make sure is there is a difference between politics and law. And so you want to make sure that what you're ultimately discussing and what your central point is a central legal question that often involves politics. There's often overlap, but they are separate things. So that is just something to check in yourself with. Am I talking about something that would go on CNN at night as a headline in a think piece? Or would this be something that academics and my professors may discuss a little bit more? I used to tell people New York Times op-eds are the most interesting thing in the world. However, we are not publishing New York Times op-eds. What we're publishing are academic pieces. So the best way to figure out kind of that difference, first of all, in structure and how they approach these political or contentious topics, is pull out a New York Times op-ed or any newspaper that you look at, and then pull up a note. You can go on our Fordham Law Review website. You can go to the alumni of your journal that you're on and read and see, okay, these may be similar issues about immigration, domestic violence, or criminal law, but they're talking about them in different ways. And you'll see that. One is often deeper, more about surrounding a question, putting out what's unknown. Another one is more surface level and more talking about just giving an overview of what other people are saying here and there. So that's just a gut check for yourself. I always used to say to my note writers, is this a New York Times op-ed? If it is, we gotta change something up. I don't think most topics inherently are off limits. I think one is if it's in the sense too political, is too in the moment that there's nothing developed enough, not even a developed debate, that kind of you're going to be the first one to say these are the 2 issues. And as cool and amazing as that sounds, we're all students. We can't be the first one to say, there's this new law that just is getting drafted, that got drafted yesterday. These are the 2 points of view, right? You kind of have to wait for the debate to brew just a little bit so that it stands the test of time in that sense.
Interesting point, I guess. So to switch to a little bit, I guess, of a different question, just getting back, I guess, to more broadly, we were wondering what your most interesting topic that you read during your tenure as EIC was.
Oh, my most interesting topic. That's a really hard one. There were 2 pieces actually that dealt with environmental law issues. And those are things that I'm not personally well versed in, but I found them to be really interesting. And one of them had to do with someone's central question was, with environmental law and climate change becoming so central as it should, there's much more conversation about it. From a legal point of view, can someone like a citizen or a civilian or even an organization or nonprofit sue a corporation essentially, or sue an entity for violating a right to a clean climate? And the point is that we want to be able to, the idea is this person I think started out being like, sick and tired of like, how come, I'm recycling everything, but these corporations aren't doing anything to save the planet? Can we do anything? Is there any legal recourse for someone like that? And those are actually, that question, while obviously embedded in environmental law, the central question is something called standing, which has to do with a topic called federal courts, which is a very like we would say black letter law question. And so that was what I found super interesting about this piece. Was I honestly even forget what the resolution this person had at this point, but what I thought was really interesting was that was an example of a contemporaneous topic. Like, I'd love to know, like, can I go sue Amazon if they're not doing enough to save the planet? But would the legal system, kind of hold that lawsuit liable? Like, is that a legal recourse? Because if it's not, then maybe we need to make sure that we're going through the legislative branch to be able to hold them liable, or some other kind of way. So I thought that was a really interesting and novel question, and ultimately was one that was embedded in a very, not basic, but a very, well, how would you call it? Important fundamental aspect of just the legal system that could be applied not just to environmental law, but other social issues like that.
Great. And then the last question we have for you, is there any one topic that you haven't seen or read yet, but would be interested in seeing or reading?
I don't think there's any one topic, but I would just really encourage people to not be afraid to talk about social issues. It's just the balance of making sure that you're focused on a legal question, like the one I just gave an example of, that can stand the test of time. I, in my tenure, like I said, was really, really passionate about making sure that diversity and inclusion was a tenet of the journal. And I wanted to not just see that in how we run the journal, but in the literature and the scholarship that we publish. So I really wanted to see more pieces about racial justice. But often it's hard to write squarely about racial justice in the sense that, you had to make sure that you were finding a relevant legal question. So an example, we had an author write about how local and state criminal law is actually pretty archaic, and that's a reason, and their interpretation is a reason why certain populations are disproportionately punished in our criminal justice system. So again, it talked about local and state criminal laws, something that doesn't necessarily have to tie to the contemporaneous situation, but it did. So I think really pushing folks to just not be afraid to take on those issues you're passionate about, but try to boil it down to a legal question. And I think a lot of people get scared of that, which makes sense. I definitely did not take on that endeavor, but I think I would love to just see more and more of that just be commonplace in law review literature and scholarship.
Awesome. Okay. That's it from us. Do any of you have any questions? If you have any questions too on Zoom, you can either unmute yourself or just type it in the chat. We'll respond. No, we're okay. Okay. Well, Saniya, thank you so much for coming. We enjoyed having you very much. And yeah, we appreciate you being here.
Of course, I'm putting my email in the Zoom chat. Feel free to email me if you have any questions about this, about law school, anything. I will respond as soon as I can, but I'm a resource here for you all. And if not me, then my successor, Tatiana, who's running the Fordham Law Review now. I know she is super excited to get involved with all of you. So between us, just know that we're here as a resource for this, but anything law school or legal field related. So don't hesitate to reach out.
Great. Thank you so much.
Of course, guys. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so now what we're gonna do is just have a quick breakout session, I guess. So we're gonna split into groups of 5 or 6. If you have any topics that you've been brainstorming the past couple of days, talk amongst your peers about that. And if you don't, also now's a good time to see sort of what you're interested in. We're gonna walk around and just check in on everyone and see how you're doing. But yeah.